Do a review on Likutei Sichos in Chelik Chof Zayin. This is the second Sicha for the portion of Behar. In this Sicha is a Rashi Sicha, but there's some gewaltige Hidushim, novel ideas that the Rebbe explains this Rashi. In this case, the question is why Rashi doesn't comment when something seems to be problematic. And the Rebbe explains that the questions in all of Torah, not just in the Haggadah, the Torah addresses the four sons, the Chocham, Rasha, the Tam, and the Sheni, the Elisha. The Rebbe said there's even a lower level than Tam, which is a Tipish, as the Rebbe will explain later on in the Sikha. But the Rebbe basically explains that the question in the Parsha, what are we going to eat? It does not mean, oh, since we're going to keep Shemitah, we're not going to sow the land, so there'll be no food. And that's the question. No. The question is a very intellectual, intelligent question from a Ben Chochem. Since the Eibishter sent so much blessings, so how is that blessing going to express when we don't have those food, literally? So how could there be those blessings? Not what are we going to do, but how is the blessing going to be expressed? Behar Beis Aleph. Mahotchen viel mol geret. The Rebbe said we had already spoken many times. As Rashi b'pirushe al haTorah verantwortet alle shaylos. In the commentary of Rashi on the Torah, he answers all questions. Was werden is eure b'pshute shel mikra, which come up in the simple study of the text. So if there is an issue that needs explanation in the simple study of the text, Rashi will address it. Und in the Erte, wo Rashi gefindt nicht kein Antwort, and in those places which Rashi has no answer, he doesn't find an answer, Leuten derech hapshat, to answer it in the simple, in the literal level of study, which is Rashi's style. Zokter eni idea, he says, I don't know, by something similar. If Rashi does not say, I don't know, that means that Rashi knows. And Rashi would address every question. So when we come to a situation where there is something troublesome on the literal level, and we don't see a comment from Rashi, we run into a problem. That's the Rebbe going to discuss here now. Darf men lifizeh habonabir. So according to this established rule, we need to have an explanation. In Oned von unser Sedre zog the Torah the dinim for Shmitas Karkois. In the beginning of our Sedre, the Torah tells us the laws of Shmitas Karkois. On the 7th year, the fields need to rest. You have to release all work, everything you do in the field. It becomes open for everybody. You have to release Shmitas Karkois. Now, Shmitas Karkois, meaning that there's nothing wrong over there. And later on, Rashi, the pasuk will talk about, so what are we going to eat if there's nothing growing? But that's not addressed right away. After the Torah talks about Shmitas Karkois, then the Torah talks about the dinim von Yovel. You have the Jubilee years, once in 50 years. The 50th years becomes the Jubilee year, which has its own halachas. And then there's also another set of halachas, if you sell, don't cheat, everything should be done in the right way because the fields go back by Yovel. And then Zog the Torah. Then finally the Torah says, V'asisem chukoisai, do my statutes, Goimer, v'nos na'oretz period, the land will give its produce, Goimer, the blessing. After all this, the pasuk says, "V'chi soimru ma noichal." And if you say, "What are we going to eat?" Goimer, we didn't sow and we didn't grow, we didn't harvest. What are we going to eat? So the pasuk says, "V'tzevisi es birchosi." God will give His blessing that the earlier years will make enough produce that it will last through the whole time. Uzraitem goimer, and then you will sow later on, and everything will work out. This is surprising that this caution that the Torah cautions and says, if you're going to say what you eat, that should have been recorded in the Torah immediately after saying that you can't sow and harvest on the seventh year. Why does the Torah wait until first it tells you about releasing and not working the fields? And then it tells to you about Yovel, and then it tells you not to cheat, and then it tells you you're going to do this mitzvahs, the fruit will give its produce. And then you say, you're going to say, what are we going to eat? Should have said right away. So we need to understand this. This question that the pasuk says, and you, if you say, and when you say, what are we going to eat? That's a question which arises immediately when you're studying the laws of Shemittah. The Torah says, the land shall rest, are resting for Hashem. Your field you should not sow, and you can't harvest. So how come the Torah answers this question for Manoichal, what are we going to eat? After we have the laws of Yovel. After Yovel. And also, after you sell each other, don't cheat each other. Why does the Torah wait? Why does the Torah wait to say, I'm going to give you my blessing for 3 years? The Rebbe says specifically the way these pasukim are set up in the parsha as a question, as an answer. If it was just giving you an additional blessing, the Eibishter is blessing you, and the land will give for both years and be a lot, you can say that it's not just a response to a question of what are we going to eat as Shemitah, but a general blessing for the Shemitah, for the Yovel, for all the mitzvahs we do. But since the blessing comes as a response to the question, what are we going to eat? So that belongs after Shvis, it would seem, when it says you have to not sow and not harvest on the Shemitah. The question is, why does the Torah wait for it till now? When der Inyan would given nit beoifen shel shaila, when this subject would not come in a matter of a question, you say, what are we going to eat? And then the response is, I'll give you the blessing, so the ground will produce enough for the time that you can't work. But when you can't verantworten, then you could have answered, as vitzivisi goimer kum, that this Hashem's blessing, I will instruct the land to make for all these years. We would say, if it wasn't a response, that it kum behemshach to the brachas, but the Eibishter sagt zu Eden, par mekayim zayin the mitzvah of Shemittah v'Yovel. This comes as a follow-up of the blessings of Hashem that He's telling them for fulfilling the mitzvahs of Shemittah v'Yovel. So one of the blessings is Tzivisi as Birchosi, I'll give my blessing, and as the Pasuk Asisim as Chukoisa, you do my statutes, and then I'm going to give my blessing. I will instruct the land should make enough produce to cover for the time that you didn't vote for. No, I'm going to command the produce to give you lots of for doing the mitzvahs Eibishter. But here, and then the pasuk said, "V'yishaftem aloris levetach." You will see. So the way it would work like this: you do all my mitzvahs. V'yishaftem aloris levetach. You sit on the land securely. V'nos noretz piria, and the land gives its fruit. Gomer. And then the pasuk says, and further, Vitzivi says, "Birchosi gomer," and I command my blessing. The osos says, "Atvu l'shloish hashonim," and it made make the food for the grain for 3 years, for the time that you didn't plow it, for the time that you didn't harvest, and for the next year till it grows. It's all a hemshach to the fulfillment of the mitzvahs of Shemittah and Yovel, everything together. You get 3 brachas, all these for 3 years. That would be okay that it didn't come right after Shemittah. But the issue is, this comes as an answer to a question. The question is, what are we going to eat? What are we going to eat is not a question for Yovel. That's only a question for Shemittah, because that's when you don't do the work. The Baal over the Torah is the Oisen, Tzaropnemen the Shiloh. Since the Torah intent here is to remove the question, what are we going to eat? Hatman dos gedarft bavornen Baal, then this should have been answered, cautioned right in the beginning. Bald when the Shalavet Nisar, as soon as the question arises, immediately when Hashem instructed the laws of Shemitah, the pasuk should say, well, if you're going to keep Shemitah, manoichal, and the pasuk should say, for 3 years, the Eibishter is going to send blessing that you're going to have everything you need for the 3 years. Because this is a response to the question, so this is specifically talking about Shemitah. It's not generally for Shemitah, Yovel, and everything else. So we throw in the blessing also of 3 years. But this is specifically for Shemitah. So why does the Torah not answer it right away? Okay, so that's the Rebbe's question. But the Rebbe says, it turns out that when you do have a Yovel following a Shemitah year, so you don't work the fields on 2 years in a row, the Shemitah year and the 50th year and the Yovel year. So maybe the Mefarshim explain that when the Eibishter says, I'll give my brachas for the 3 years, that is to compensate for the 2 years that you didn't work the fields, which it would include Shemitah and the year that follows Shemitah, which is the Jubilar year with the 50th year. So, therefore, the place of it, according, if this is the Pshat, belongs after Shemitah and Yovel. The Rebbe says Rashi doesn't learn like that. Rashi doesn't learn that when the pasuk says for 3 years, that's to compensate for Shemitah and Yovel. It's only about Shemitah. So you can't say, like the Mefarshim trying to explain, that it comes at the end because this is to make up for 2 years not working for the Shemitah and the Yovel, and that's why the pasuk says it'll do for 3 years. Rashi doesn't learn that. Let's look inside. Zayin and Faran Mefarshim was learned, and there are certain commentators who learn, as the psukim v'chisoimru goymer v'tzivisas b'chosi goymer l'sholosh hashonim. This that you say, and that you'll say, what are we going to eat? And Hashem says, I'll give my blessing for 3 years. But seeing sich oich of yovel shalach Shemitah. They refer to also on the yovel that follows Shemitah. It's not exclusively, because every Shemitah has a 3-year problem. The year before, the year itself, and the year that follows. until the crops grows. So, but it also goes on Yovel, especially over there. There's 2 years of not working. Then you're not allowed to plow or to sow 2 years after one another. Shnasa Shemitah, Shnasa Yovel. It's the Shemitah year and the Yovel year. Unevdem zog Torah, and for this, Torah says, Tzvi says, Birchosu Goimer, L'sholosh Hashonim. I'll say my bracha for the 3 years, which includes Shemitah and Yovel. Und der Fahr steht, die Psukim anal, noch die Dinge von Yovel. And that's why these Pesukim are written after the laws of Yovel, because they address when Shemitah and Yovel follow each other, when Yovel follows Shemitah. So there's 2 years, and that's when we need the blessing even more because of the Yovel that followed Shemitah. That would answer why this question is after Yovel as well, not right after Shemitah. The problem is that Rashi doesn't learn that this is the meaning of the pasuk Tzivisi Berchosi, that it's talking about the Yovel. Rashi clearly says it's talking about the Shemitah alone. Oh, but in Pirush Rashi, Kenmen Azonit Island, and Rashi we cannot interpret as such. But Rashi learns as the psukim v'tzivisi as Berchosi Goimer uzraitim es Hashana Sheminis Goimer. That when the pasuk I'll say my bracha for 3 years, and you will sow the 8th year. It is not discussing the 7th Shemitah, which Yovel follows. You have 7 times 7. And then comes the 50th, comes Yovel. That's not the Shemitah Shviz. Which comes right next to, immediately before Yovel. That's not what we're talking about. Nor mikroze nemar, Rashi says this clearly, quoting Rashi. B'shara Shmitas Kulan, talking about all Shmitas. Nit lifnei shnas hayevel, not before shnas hayevel. That's when the pasuk is talking about. And the Rashi explains how every Shemitah needs a blessing for 3 years. So based on this, we don't understand. It's surprising. Why does Rashi not answer this? Rashi should explain, why are we waiting with this pasuk until after the laws of Yovel? Why didn't we bring this pasuk, which is answering an issue that we have with Shemitah? Why don't we bring it right after Shemitah? We bring it after Yovel, after that, when it really seems to belong right after Shemitah. And why does Rashi not say it? Rashi needs to answer if it's something which is problematic. There seems to be a problem in the simple meaning of the pasuk. So, to sum it up, the Rebbe wants to understand, since Rashi explains all difficult problems that might arise in the pasuk, Rashi seems to ignore a very fundamental question. Why does the pasuk tell us about the blessing for the 7th year after interrupting first telling us about Yovel and other matters, and only then coming back to the blessing that Hashem says for the observing of the Shemitah? As we'll see, the Rebbe is going to explain, after asking some more questions in the next days, that this is not just a simple question of what do we eat, as we'll see. Ois Beis. In Ois Beis, the Rebbe asks another question, which seems in the simple meaning, the language of the question, the way it's stated in the pasuk, is when you will say what are we going to eat? It doesn't say if you will say. The language when you will say implies that you will say that when you will say. When you will say, what will we eat? And why would the Torah write this in a way? Is this a question when you will say that we need to say? That seems to be a question of lack of faith, lack of acceptance of all the blessings that Hashem has promised. When you will say, if you will say, we understand. When you will say, it seems almost that this is a positive, this is an expected, this is something which should be said. How do we explain that? Why should somebody question Hashem's mitzvahs if the Eibishter tells us to rest? He sure will see to it that we will be able to survive this. Let's look inside. Gaze. Noch hashayla, was Rashi hat lechere gedav bavoren. Another question that Rashi seemingly should have cautioned and answered us and tell us the answer to. From the loshen hakosu v'chisoimru manechel, the language used by the verse, and when you say, what shall we eat, is mashma. It appears as is vadai as men vet azoifrag. It's surely you will ask so. Vorm oib kavonas hakosuv. Chi means you will ask so, because if the pasuk means is shema toimrum, perhaps you will say, but mergi pas der loshon, it would be more fitting for the Torah to use the language ve'im toimru, if you will say al derech, like we say ve'im omar yoymar ha'eved, if the slave will say, I love my master, I don't want to go out, that you bore his ear. So over there, im means if, but here you say v'chi. Rashi is mefarish than posik. Rashi explains the verse with regards to a false prophet, where the pasuk says v'chi. The pasuk says over there v'chi soymar bilvovcha. When the prophet hear a prophecy, so the pasuk says v'chi soymar bilvovcha eicha neita gomer. And you say in your heart, you say the Eibishter is saying not to listen to a false prophet. But how do we know that he's a false prophet? So the pasuk says v'chi soymar. If you say in your heart, how are we going to know? Rashi explains there, it's not if you're going to say. Rashi says, asidim atem lemar. Rashi says, when you say, because you're going to say, and Rashi quotes a factual occurrence. Hananiah came and he gave a prophecy. It was a false prophecy. So we see that the word v'chi, Rashi translates, this is going to happen. Asidim is niglatic. So now do we understand why does the Torah use here? And when you say you're going to complain, you're going to say how we're going to have food to eat. Is niglatic for vos nutz Torah loshon was meant asidim atam lemer. Why does Torah use a language which means you are going to say so in the future? Kilo azoy darv zayin, they say that as if to say, well, that's the way it should be. But it doesn't fit. Seemingly to challenge Hashem and to challenge is not something which should be. This asking, that seemingly points as we're not completely, entirely relying on Hashem. That we learned that one should rely on Hashem and not question, because the pasuk talks about the greatness of Avraham. So it says, as Simon, as Behemin B'Hashem. The Torah says he believed in Hashem. Behemin B'Hashem, he believed in Hashem. How do we know that he believed in Hashem? is when loy shah loy ois. He didn't ask for a sign. He trusted Hashem. The Eibishter promised him bris ben absorim. Promised him a child. He believed in Hashem. The Eibishter said to him that he'll have to give birth to a son. And behemin b'Hashem v'yachshav lo tzedakah. Why? He didn't ask. So it means asking itself shows a lack of faith. So here you're saying that Yidden will ask what we're going to eat, that they're going to have a lack of faith. Why do we have to say? You could say, and if they're going to have a question, then the answer is Hashem will provide. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, in this case, there's not even so much a general belief, but the Torah has just finished saying before this pasuk that the Yidden are going to get in abundance. Nochmal, gleich far dem shaila. Right immediately before the question, when you say what we're going to eat, state the pasuk. Canal, the pasuk says, as mentioned earlier, v'nosno ha'oretz pirya. The fruit will give its produce. V'achaltem la'soiva. And you'll eat and be satisfied. V'shaftem lavetach oleo, and you will sit securely on the land. And Rashi explains, what does it mean that v'nosna oretz piryo, v'nosna oretz, and then you'll sit securely oleo, v'nosna oretz goymer, v'shaftem lavetach oleo, sheloi tidaku v'shnaz batzoros. You'll sit securely means you won't have any worries from a year of hunger. There's going to be growing, things are going to be great. And then Rashi adds, what does it mean by chaltav laseva? You're going to eat to satisfaction. So for Rashi, even in the inside, in your stomach, in your intestine, there will be a blessing over there. That means you maybe eat even a little, but you're satisfied. You're satisfied with a little. So you see these major blessings that the Eibishter is giving you. After all these blessings, then the pasuk says, "Is b'yosu tamua." This is very surprising. Yeah, what are we going to eat? No, then with the Torah zocht. After the Torah says, as the Eibishter is maftiach, that Hashem promises. As well need sein keine Deiges. There will be no worries of a lack of grain. There's going to be in their tevuah, there's going to be a supernatural, a beyond nature blessing in this grain, even in your stomach, those growing things will satisfy you. How is it fit? Immediately following that, you have the question, and then if you say, or when you say, and when you say, not just ki, it's vichi, asidim atem loimer, like Rashi touched, you will say. Why should they say that if we've just learned about all the fantastic promises that Hashem promised in the Torah for all the blessings? And the issue we have is not the question, but why Rashi doesn't comment on it. We don't find seemingly that Rashi should answer this question in his commentary. So we have an issue, the Rebbe discusses in Ois Beis, the issue that this question is presented in a way that you will challenge and question Hashem. Why? Especially if you want to say if you will, that's one thing. But why say you will challenge Hashem? As Rashi says, V'chi means I see them in the future. Why would you challenge Hashem, especially after you heard the promises of Hashem? So why does Rashi not comment on this? And the Rebbe will therefore come to the conclusion later on, this is not a challenging question in the belief of Hashem as appears at first glance. The Rebbe has a whole new mahalach, a whole new direction and insight over here. This is not a simple question of faith. What are we going to eat? Not at all. But before the Rebbe comes to this answer, the Rebbe comes in a whole new topic that the Rebbe, another Rashi, with addressing. The Rebbe actually addresses that this question is a question of achocha. It's a very intellectual question. This is not a question, challenging Hashem, if I'm going to keep the mitzvah, how we're going to eat. No. The question is, the chacham wants to know, how is a blessing that I know is happening, how is that blessing going to manifest itself when there's nothing sown there, nothing grown over there? How are we going to find that blessing? He wants to find the blessing, not he's questioning whether there is the blessing, as the Rebbe will continue to explain later on in Nois Gimel. But first, we'll have to go through a whole nother Rashi in Parshas Boy that the Rebbe will explain. Ois Gimel. Ois Gimel. So, V'yesh Loimar, so the Rebbe says, we can say, as der Tam farvos Rashi beparshosenu zogt nit kein tirutz auf die Shales ha'amuris in V'chisoimru. What is the reason that Rashi does not comment in our parsha about, to give us an answer on the questions that we had on V'chisoimru, the placement of this question, and what kind of a question is it? Why does Rashi not address it? Is weil b'shas as ben chomesh lemikra lernt in chumash. It's because when a 5-year-old learns in the chumash wegen a shaila auf a mitzvah, that there is a question on a mitzvah, mitn loshen v'chisoimru, the question begins with the language, and when you say, v'chisoimru, when you say. So when the Ben Chomesh Lemikra learns that pasuk, which brings him to the issues that the Rebbe discussed now, der monte sich auf den ersten Mal, wo hat gelernt kein ze. He reminds himself the very first time that he learned something similar to this. There is a similar language and questions that begins with the word v'chi. Brier in Soif Parshas Boy. He remembers, he learned so in the portion, in the end of Parshas Boy. Over there, the pasuk says, v'hoya, and it will be, ki yisholcha bincha, goimer, when your son will ask you. So he reminds himself, he learns here, he remembers what he learned before in the end of Parshas Shmuel. Ungedenkendig was Rashi is dort mefarish, dem ki yisholcha bincha goimer. And then he remembers what Rashi explained, how Rashi explained ki yisholcha bincha over there, the ki yisholcha bincha, werd by ihm loidem bederach memele parentver de shailas ha'amuris beparshasenu. So then, when he remembers that Rashi, automatically the questions that we have in our parsha are answered. Oh, what does it say in Rashi over there? So there's a whole big arichas in the Rashi over there, and the Rebbe is pshat in this. And this will help the child and us understand why the placement of it is at the end, and why are we questioning Hashem that it's actually a little bit different. But first, let's give our attention for a little bit to the next Rashi, to the Rashi in the end of Parshas Boy. The Pasuk dort zok, the Pasuk says over there, when your son asks you later on, next day, Achar Zman, Mazois, what is this? Mazois, he asks you, what is this? What's going on over here? That's a question of a non-intelligent tzar. Stellt sich Rashi, of Mazois. So Rashi says, what is this? Who asked the question? There's no articulation. There is no, what's basically Mazois, what's going on? So Rashi explains, when he's mefarish, zetinik tipesh. It's a tinik who's a fool, who's a tipesh. He doesn't know to deepen his question, to articulate, to ask specifics. He just closes up, doesn't mention any details, just says, Mazis, what's this? And then Rashi continues. In another place, the Pasuk states over there, so this is already in Boschanon, the Pasuk says, Moha Eidus va'achukim va'mishpotim v'goymer. Over there, the son is also asking, but over there, he's asking, what are the testimonies, what are the statutes, what are the laws? He's articulating his question. Harezois Shilas ben Chochem. That's a question of a wise son. He's asking, not what is this, but asking specifically. And Rashi brings down the very famous saying we say in the Agoda, Dibra Torah keneged arba abonim. Torah speaks corresponding to four sons, different levels. Atam, the simpleton. Arosha, the evil one. V'she'eni lishal, the one who knows not to ask. V'hashoyel derech chochma, one who asks in a wise way. So we see this Rashi. So when we read this Rashi, we don't understand why does Rashi have to bring in the Mokamacha? Why is he saying elsewhere about the Chochem? Is nicht verstandig, is not understood. Lamainav Kimini in Parshas Boy, why does it make a difference in the portion of Boy to wissen, to know, as b'Mokamacha, there's elsewhere, is Oich Do Hashalas ben Chochem. There's also a question of a wise son. So we're starting off right away. There's a question of a wise son, and therefore, and then Rashi says, Torah speaks corresponding to four sons. Not once we talk about the tipesh, the tam over here, and the chochem later on. Then we have four sons, not only the tipesh and the chochem, but also the Rosh, the Sheidene, the Elisha. Afila oib menzol zogen. And even if you're going to say, so why does Rashi have to bring in about the chochem over here? And even if you're going to say, as Rashi lost in this, for whatever reason, without knowing the reason, you're going to say Rashi has a reason. As a zayin for an there are four sons. So we know that there's four sons that are asking questions. Then Rashi should have said this earlier. Isn't it verglatik? It's not smooth. Parvos doctors dos nit frier. How come Rashi is not telling us earlier about that there are four sons? And the Rebbe brings down the posik earlier. Frier from posik. Earlier on the verse when it says, when you do this service, Sagt Chazar v'shono b'shvil davar shenis chadish bo. Talking about the service of Pesach and the whole procedures. So the pasuk said, Rashi says over there, Chazar v'shono, that the pasuk repeats again about doing the service of Pesach, b'shvil davar shenis chadish bo, because there is something new in this parsha. The parsha is Shoyno Nemar Behoyu Ki Yomru, when they will say, what is this testimony lochem? So over there says Rashi, Rashi says, what is meant over there? Beben Rosh HaKosov Medaber. But Vikan, when it says is you have to initiate, you have to tell your son. The son that doesn't know how to ask. So Rashi already mentioned previously about the Sheni de Lishul, which is that pasuk, and the pasuk before that, in which the pasuk is the Rashi who says Ma'avayzas Lochem. So if Rashi wants to say, well, there's more than two sons, if you're going to say that, why does Rashi over here in the end of Parshas Boy, why does Rashi have to say also about the Chochem? Because there are four children. For whatever reason, Rashi must know. So why did Rashi say before that there's four sons? Since it says over there already that we're talking about the Rosh Hashanah Elisha, so there Rashi should have cautioned and said, don't think that the Torah only talks about two sons. Nor as weiter in der Parsha kommt zu, I said there is also Oich Shailas Hatipish, the Shalda question, which is the Mazois by us. And then there's another place with the Shailas Chochem, as Rashi brings down here. Shailas Ben Chochem. Moed is Chochem Mishpat, as Rashi says here. So now you have the Torah talking about four sons. So essentially, the Rebbe is asking on the Parsha, the end of Parsha's Boy, and Rashi is saying this is Mazois, is talking about a Tepesh who doesn't know. Why does Rashi have to bring in what's going on with the Chochem later on? And then Rashi says, "Keneged arbo bonim divrei Torah," speaks against corresponding to four sons. And if Rashi wants to say that there's four sons, that don't make a mistake, there's only two or one, whatever, Rashi should have said it the first time, the previous Rashi. When Rashi says over there that the Torah talks again about again about Pesach, and it is because we want to talk also about Sheni de Lishul, and before we talked about the Rosha, and now we talk about the Sheni de Lishul. So Rashi should have said over there, well, we have four sons. There's not only these two. If Rashi is wanting to tell us that there's four sons. So there has to be another reason by the end of Parshas Boy why Rashi brings in the son, the Chochem in this Rashi over here when we're talking the Mazois and then the four sons. There has to be for another reason. Okay, so now we'll do Ois Dalet. In Ois Dalet, the Rebbe begins his explanation by first coming up with a novel idea that when we say that the Torah speaks of four sons, it's not only in the relationship to the Pesach Seder. Commonly, we understand the idea that from the Mechilta that 4 sons come to the Seder, 4 sons ask questions about Pesach, and we have to deal with 4 sons. The Rebbe's idea is, no, there are 4 sons in all of the Torah. As a simple language, all the Torah, we talk about 4 sons, not just the Pesach and the Seder. And in Pshuta Shel Mikra, that's the way we interpret that the simple meaning of the text, the Eibishter, all of the Torah corresponds to them, to the 4 sons. And that will give us an understanding eventually how this question of Man Noichal in our parsha has a connection to the Chach. But let's look inside. Dalet. The Ashlemer Debi in them. So we can say the explanation of this. Bechlal is man gewohnt zu teichen. Generally, we are accustomed to translate the Wörter. The words, Dibra Torah keneged arba abonim. The Torah speaks corresponding to 4 sons. B'shayches zum chiyuv von Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim b'lo Pesach. As it relates to the obligation of relating the exodus of Egypt on the night of Pesach. The night of Pesach, when we tell the story of Mitzrayim, we have to tell it to 4 sons. As the shailos from the bonim, the questions of the sons, Zayin b'negeya, the mitzvahs from Pesach, their questioning is the mitzvahs of the night of Pesach. So what does it mean? The Torah speaks corresponding to 4 sons. Meint as Torah sagt, the Torah tells us, that we should respond and answer each one of the children according to their level. But this is all as it is connected to the night of Pesach. Normally, we don't say the 4 sons are in the whole Torah, only as related to Pesach. The story of Pesach has to be addressed to all the different children. But it's not like we're saying the Torah speaks to 4 different children throughout the Torah. So the Rebbe says, well, this is true according to the Sifri, but not in Pshat. Is emestake, ados is der mekuven von the Wörter Leut derech halacha. So it's true that this is the intent of these words according to the style of halacha. Wie steht in Mechilta, and as it says in the Mechilta, that's what we say in Nagodesh Pesach. We're talking to the 4 sons. But that does not mean that that's what Rashi. Rashi is different. Aber Pirush Rashi al HaTorah is in Yonei zu Mefarish Zayin Pshuta Shel Mikra. Rashi's purpose is to give us the simple meaning of the word. Und in Pashtus Aksuvim, and the simple meaning of the word is the Shaila from the Tinek Tipish. When we're talking about over here in this Parshas Boy, the end of Parshas Boy, that this Tipish Shaila is asking the Mazois, nit wegen the mitzvahs from the Pesach. This is not with regards to the mitzvahs of the night of Pesach, nor benegeya the mitzvahs b'choir. It's the mitzvah b'choir with the Eibishter that talks about in the parsha that you have to redeem every b'choir and the leitivda varafter b'chol b'choir b'nachatiton. Was be'emshich l'zeh shtei the shaila. Then says the question, the pasuk when it says ki yisholcho bincha mazois is a follow-up to the laws of b'choir, not with Pesach. So according to the Pshat, this is nothing. This Tipa Shaila is not connected to the Pesach, it's connected to the Bechor. This the Rebbe adds in the bracket gives also an understanding the language that Rashi uses over here. He calls the child a Tipesh versus the Tam, because we're not talking here with regards to Pesach. Rashi himself refers in the end Tam, but Rashi calls him here Tipesh. Leitem vet man euch verstehen, according to this, that this is not talking about Pesach. This is talking about B'choir. We can also understand Favas Rashi nutzt dem Loshen why Rashi used language that tinek tipish. It's a tipish, a fool. She'ena yedei lahamik shalose doesn't know how to deepen his question. Only tam. Why doesn't he use the word tam, a simpleton? With the loshen is in Mechilta, as it's in the Mechilta. Use loshen tam. Ba'agodah shel Pesach, and the Godah shel Pesach. Ubefrat Rashi alein is mamshich. Rashi himself continues. Loit der girsa nefutzer bepirush Rashi as the most common, the common version, as in the Rashi. Dibra Torah keneged arba abonim tam chula. One of them is the tam. Val pidyon bechor is a mitzvah was hot nit keisach protim. Because if it's going on the pidyon bechor, it's a mitzvah. It doesn't have too much details. So there is a level in foolishness. There's a tam and there's a tipish. For not to know, Mele, if he doesn't know to distinguish and ask a question with regards to Pesach, he's a tam. But if he doesn't know what to ask when it comes to Bechor, which has few halacha, then he's a tipish. Azoi, as oicha ben was is nitke chochem atam. Bechor, even if he was a tam, can sich oich vanander kleiden with them. He can also sort it out what's going on. Und wird der Rebbe nicht fragen, stam mazois. He's not going to ask, what is this when it comes to Bechor. Und der was fragt hier mazois, and one who does ask mazois, he says, nor the father said is a tinik tipish. It's because he's a child who's a fool. Mashenkin, der tam von der Agoda, as opposed to the tam of the Agoda, was sein Scheile is wegen the mitzvahs from Pesach. He's asking about Pesach, not about Bechor. Can schon sein von a hecheren Sug. He can already be a little greater category. Nit kein tipish. But Beleil Pesach is faran haribus mitzvahs, because it's not like Bechor. On the night of Pesach, there's a lot of categories, many categories of mitzvahs. There's Eidus, Chukim, and Eich Mishpatim, the various different parts of testimony, statutes, and Mishpatim. In welchen es ist schwer zu voneinander bleiben sich, it's difficult to sort it out. A viele Farazavas is nicht kein Tipish, even somebody who's not a fool. Und the Shaila mal Zois, and when you say with the mal Zois, weiß nur, as the Shaila is atam. That only shows, doesn't show that he's a fool, it shows he's a simpleton. Because he says, if you don't understand what's going on by this Seder, we can't call you a, by Yitzis Mitzrayim, we can't call you a Tipish, we call you a Tam. But in Rashi, when he's talking about that, we're saying that this is talking about the Bechor, and that the question of Mazois is not reserved only, according to Rashi, goes on the laws of Bechor. And the Rebbe says, just like we're saying this question over here by the Tipish, that he's not asking about Pesach, he's asking about Bechor. Al derech zeh is oich the shailas ben chochem b'pshutish l'mikra. There's also the question of the wise son in the simple pshat of the posik. Nit b'negei Pesach. He's not asking with regards to Pesach. Nor in fact, he's asking a general question about mitzvahs in allgemein. He's asking about mitzvahs in general. Moha edus v'achukim v'amishpotim. What is the Eidus Chuk Mishpatim that God commanded you? What answer? We were slaves, and he commanded us as all in the pasuk over there that it's told us all these, because we're not talking about Pesach. We're doing all the Eidus Mitzvahs Chuk Mishpatim, and he took us out and he told us all the commandments. Was the mitwert gemeint alle mitzvahs Torah. That meant all mitzvahs Torah. That's why by Yitzavenu as kol hachukim. Oh, so now you asked before. The Rebbe said, why didn't Rashi bring before the four sons? In Pshute Shel Mikra, the Tipish in our Parshas Boy, and the Chochem, their questions are not related to the Seder, to the Yetzias Mitzrayim, to the Agoda. Only the two, the Rosha and the She'eni De Lishel, in the previous Sukkim and Boy, those are the ones that are connected. So Bapizei is moving Bepashtus. So now we understand very simply. Avos Rashi bring need the shilas from them Tinik Tipish. Why Rashi does not bring down the questions of the child who's a fool, Unshilas ben Chochem, and the question of the Chochem, he doesn't bring them down freer before. He doesn't bring them down earlier. So freer, when read wegen Shilas or Rosh, he doesn't bring down the question of the Tipesh and the Chochem. But those are in ganz besonderen Jahren, they're separate matters. Freer, that's wegen der Shilas ben Rosh und wegen dem wie Gadeto zum Sheni de Elisha. Before we're talking about the son, the evil son who asks Lachem, and the son that we have to open up any the Elisha vi Gadeto libincha. B'shayches to the mitzvah of Pesach. They're talking about the night of Pesach. And there's no point in bringing the Chochem and the Tipish, which are talking about Bechoyer and about mitzvahs v'chlal. Hat es nit kein Shayches mit Shayles hat Tipish wegen mitzvahs pidin Bechoyer. It has no connection about the question of the fool, about the Tipish, about the mitzvah pidin Bechoyer. Weil der gesagt nicht mit the Shayles ben Chochem. It has no connection to the question of ben Chochem. Wegen Edus v'chukim v'amishpatim, which is alle mitzvahs in allgemein. It has no connection to that. He's asking specifically about Pesach. That's his issue. So why would we bring down? So the Rebbe answers that before, when we bring down the pasuk of Higadeto Levincha, and Rashi brings down that it's Shana, that it's repeated because of the Rasha, and here we're talking about the Ende Elisha, but there's nothing to do with the Chacham and the Tipesh, because they are talking about different, not about Pesach. The Tipesh we're talking about Bechoyer, and the Chacham is talking about all the mitzvahs. Okay, now the Rebbe goes on to ask the question that we learned before. In Ois Hey, the Rebbe will say, okay, so if the Shailas Chacham is totally different than the Shiloh of the Tipesh, it's different subject matters even. So why does Rashi continue after Rashi brings down Mazois, and then Rashi brings down the Shailas Chacham? What do we got to bring down the Shailas Chacham over here? It's not the same subject matter. It's not Bechoyer. So the question that we asked before, why does Rashi bring in the Chacham over here? It becomes even stronger now that we explained that these are even different subjects. The Chacham is talking about all mitzvahs, and the Tipesh, the pasuk here, is talking about the mitzvah b'choyer. Apizeh, hey. Apizeh wird aber noch starker defrier die Keshaile. Based on this, however, the previous question becomes even stronger. Pavos is Rashi Moisim behemshich to Zatinik Tipesh v'shoel mazois. That when Rashi finishes to say, as a follow-up, this is the Tinik Tipesh who asks Mazois. So why does Rashi continue and say, "B'mokem achar o emer shalos ben chacham"? Somewhere else he says a shalof ben chacham. But but based on the above, that it's different questions, different issues. How do the shalos ben chacham can shaychas nit mit shalos hatipesh? The question of the ben chacham has no connection to the question of the tipesh. This is a specific question of Pitim B'choyer. The Rebbe said that makes him an additional tipesh beyond the time. And what does we have to bring in something from the Ben Chacham? Now, If, however, you're going to say that somehow it's another son, it's another connection, so then why don't we bring this down before when we talk about the Sheni de Lishol? Right. Let's look inside. Apizeh wird aber noch stärker die friedige Scheide. Aber was ist Rashi meise beimschach zu zetinik tippe shel mazois? So why does Rashi add b'moka macher or immer shalos ben chochem? Then in another place he says b'shalos ben chochem. Rashi brings down. Api analo doch the shalos ben chochem geshaychas nit b'shalos atipish. We already said this. There's no connection. Was is Shayla blows opinion b'chay? Uleidoch on the other hand, so the Rebbe. Rashi verbinds if it is connected, it's questions to a son. Even though the questions are not in the same subject matter, but still it's connected. This questions of a son. Rashi freer. So how come Rashi doesn't connect it earlier by Shalos ben Rosha Usheni de Lishel Canal? Like Rebbe said before. Why doesn't Rashi not mention it in the previous Rashi when he talks about the Rosh and the Sheni de Lishel? He should say there's 4 sons. Because questions are questions, sons are sons. If over here we're bringing in, so first the Rebbe asked, why bring in the Chacham over here? It's a different question. And if it is important to bring in because it's still a question of a son, so why earlier when we learned about the Rosh and Sheni de Lishel, why don't we say over there about the 4 sons? Is that what was it? When it comes to Pesach, we see that the Torah wants us to take care of older children. So, and therefore, the Torah addresses the people that we name, that we must try to convince them to come to the Seder. If you only had these 2 psukim over there, and we say the Torah addresses, what happens? Why is the Torah addressing only 2 sons? What about a son who's not a Rosh, not a Sheni de Lishel? Why are we not addressing him over there? Rashi should want to bring down older sons because we have a problem. Why would the Torah only address 2 of the sons, the Rosh and the Sheni de Lishel? What about the Chacham son? Well, one would argue that the reason the Torah addresses only these 2, because these 2, if we don't address them, they're not going to come to the Seder. The Rasha, because he doesn't care, and the Sheni de Lishel doesn't even know about it. So we have to attract them and bring them in. The other ones will come. Maybe we're not. These 2 are exception that we have to reach out to them. But when the Torah says later on, the Torah reaches out to all children. Let's look inside. Then we know already that there's something here. Hey. No, we're in the middle of hey. Is that the Rebbe explains. Shas men lernt as belel Pesach is da at sivui zu verantworten the Shaila for Ben Rosha. When we learn on the night of Pesach, there is a command to answer the question of Ben Rosha. Well, that we have to tell our sons the Sheni de Lishel. But when we can't learn, then we could learn Ados Sadin Miyuchad by Pesach. This is a special halacha by Pesach. Since the idea of Exodus to Egypt is something, an important aspect in all of Torah, as in the simple text, many psukim talk about the Yitzias Mitzrayim. So we have to make sure that all sons will participate in the mitzvahs from Leil Pesach and the mitzvah of the night of Pesach. Ubefrat, especially, noch taines pare lechuna gvorim. Especially, you see, Paro's argument was the men should go. Unit tapchem. Children have nothing to go. So one would say the Torah wants to involve, it's a central aspect of Yiddishkeit. And over here the Torah, my time is zokt on the Torah. And for that reason the Torah commands, as Eden soll sich vernehmen euch mit a ben Roshe und she'ene idealishel, that the Yidden should also take care and make sure that the evil son and the one who knows not to ask, we have to draw them in. It's an important mitzvah. And they were going to be left behind. Pari didn't want them to come. But by because these two categories we have to worry about. If we will not articulate and explain to them the mitzvahs of the night of Pesach, they will not perform these mitzvahs. How so? Simply. Der Ben Roshe is the Chazah, was B'loshe Rashi. The Ben Roshe is such a son, as Rashi says, he excludes himself from the community, from the rest, from all. So we need to bring him back in the Avodah Hazois, in the service, in the Pesach service, for Zebach Pesach. So he might get lost, so we need to attract him in, bring him in. And the one who knows not to ask, he's a son that doesn't even know that there's anything to ask about. So he's always out not getting it. He doesn't even say, where is this? He doesn't ask at all. In the mitzvah. So therefore, you need to pull him in. You got to drag him into these mitzvahs by Vigato Levincha. Rashi is mevar the minyan from Vigato Levincha. And Rashi explained, what does it mean, say to your son? Not say to Durden, because of melamed shetiftach loy ato, you open up to him, b'divrei agoda, with agodic words, hamoshchnes alev, that draw the heart. Bring him in by telling him things of the agoda that draw the heart. Oh. So one is not concerned why the pasuk only talks about two sons, because those are the two vulnerable sons which may not be participating at the Seder, one because he carries evil, and the other one because he doesn't know what's going on. So you need to reach out to them. But the other children, okay, by the sugim from tipesh, tam, and chacham, but by the categories of the fool, simpleton, or the chacham, what man gekent meinen, one could think, as is nicht so wichtig zu verantworten sehr scheiles. It is not so important to answer their questions. To answer them by legabe zeh is netoder chashash, because with regards to them, there is no worry. As chisorn havon, if it brings to nit mekayim in the mitzvah, that the fact of lack of understanding will bring them to not observing the mitzvah. So Torah does not address them, doesn't say you have to teach them. As his blois abakoshes tam basbar, when they ask, they're asking what's the reason, or what's the explanation. So articulate, but they're not going to do it. The far state it in Torah as it doesn't say that you should answer them or what you should answer them, because they're not of a concern to us. So one would learn only the two sons, those are of concern to us. But when we come to our pasuk, we see the Torah is concerned even with a tipesh. Zetman as number one, Aleph. By andere mitzvahs in Torah, Alma is Torah mechayiv to antworten of the shaylos from Aben. That also by other mitzvahs of the Torah obligates us to answer the question, not only by Yitzis Mitzrayim, not only by some thing so important, but anytime this is talking about Torah wants us to answer this one. On base. And number two, we see Torah zogt on as und was, that and what. So antwoorden auf the Shalos von Atinik Tippers, that we have to answer. Also tells us we have to answer what we should answer to a child who's a fool to a Tippish. Stellt sich the Shaila. So then the question comes, Sicher fragt euch ben Chochem Shailas wegen mitzvahs. Certainly, the wise son also asks question about mitzvahs. But Adrabe, sein dik a Chochem hat mistam mehr Shailas. On the contrary, being a Chochem, he has more questions. If we need to respond to the question from a child who's a Tippish, is Alachas kam v'kama as the Torah hat gedarft bavornen zu vernehmen sich mit the Shalos von Ben Chochem. Torah should have us tell us how to answer a Chochem, because the Torah cares about the Tippish. Why not about? Should certainly care about the Chochem. Zogt Rashi, Einachanami. That's not true. There's a question of Ben Chochem too. And then Rashi says, and das is the diuk loshon Rashi be'emshach lozer. And that's the exact language that Rashi uses to follow once Rashi brings in the Chochem. Dibra Torah keneged arba bonim. The Torah speaks corresponding to 4 sons. That means made Rashi kipash the loshon. Rashi means as it says. Doesn't mean about Seder. It doesn't mean about Yitzis Mitzrayim. It means all Torah. As Torah bechlal, nit nor b'shayches mit Leil Pesach. Torah generally, not as connected to the night of Pesach. Red wegen all arba bonim. It talks about all 4 sons. Das heißt, man gefindt in Torah shebiksav, that we find in the written Torah a hayroah. We find a lesson, an instruction, a directive. Did you answer the question of all sons? Tom, Rosh, Elishel, Bashel, Chachma. To answer the mother, Rashi quotes here. Because Rashi is saying, now that we're learning, and we're talking about the Tippish, so we just tried to answer. And we're all parts of Torah. So what about the Chacham? And then Rashi says, you know what? The Torah generally, sometimes about Bechor, sometimes about general mitzvahs, sometimes about the mitzvah of Pesach. The Torah talks about all 4 different categories. And the Torah wants us to teach all of them in their ways to get them involved in the Torah. So the Rebbe explained over here, when we were learning L'chatchila, that we only know about Pesach and the Chacham and the Rosh and the Sheni de Lishul, we would think that the only reason we're addressing them is because they're vulnerable. We don't think that they're going to make it to the Seder, and we have to encourage them. The other ones will come. If they don't know the answer, who says we have to tell them answers? But now that the Torah addresses, so we see not only the Agodah, not only Yitzis Mitzrayim, all mitzvahs, and we see we have to even address a Tippish to make sure that he's going to get some explanation. And then so Rashi says, oh, the Chacham also, we see, what about the Chacham? See also. And then the Rashi says, well, we're going back to the previous 2 as well, because the Torah addresses all of the 4 sons. What the Rebbe is getting at is whenever there's a question, there's a possibility who's asking the question. So in our case, when we're asking, who's the one that's asking the question? We got to think. And the Rebbe is going to explain that this is actually the question of the wise son, not a challenging question of how we're going to make it. Let's look inside. Well, based on the above, as Dibra, Torah keneged arba'obon. The Torah speaks corresponding to 4 sons. For our statement, we can understand, everywhere we find a question of the Torah, if a mitzvah and a mitzvah, we have to figure out, we have to sort out about which son is the Torah talking about. Sizlav Davke Ashaila. It's not necessarily a question was men muss bewornen bichdei zu versichern de kima mitzvah am shoel. It's not necessarily a question that we need to make sure that he's going to do the mitzvah, like we thought before, maybe by Pesach, that he's going to do the mitzvah. Or that afila shaila was kunt mitzada sofik, or the chalishus in amuna, or a question that comes because there's a doubt or there's a weakness in belief. That's not necessarily what a question is. As Ken Zayn Hashalas Chochem. Hashalas Ben Chochem could be a question of a Ben Chochem. Was der Zweck von sein Shaila, and what's the purpose of the question? It's not a questioning. It's related to klar machen, it's to clarify. Verstehen Protein to understand the details. Al derech the Shailas Ben Chochem Moedus Vachukim HaMishpatim. Similar to the question, he's asking a very intellectual question. What are these difference between testimonies, statutes, and mishpatim? It's an articulated question, a specific question. He's not saying I'm not going to do it. It's not questioning it, not strengthening it. It's not necessarily, or it doesn't mean that it's a question that you're not going to do it. When you ask the question, it's not challenging. It's to clarify and to understand. Ask the question of the Ben Chochem. And this is the Rebbe saying the question here. Damit was the Torah stellt die Scheile wie Chisomru. Beim Sehen von dem ganzen Ding, and the fact that the Torah puts this question at the end of this subject. It clarifies this is not a question of how we're going to eat. Then it would be before. Euch noch die Dinge von Geulah aus auf Dinge von Geulah. Und noch mehr gleich noch die Brachos v'avtochos von Rebbe and more. Right after the blessings and promises of Hashem. So what do you have to ask? The Torah is telling this is not a question. Torah says, notice, you're gonna, fruit will be given by the produce will be produced, and you'll eat satisfied. Mach Torah klor. So Torah clarifies. Adoy is nicht a shaila von a ben Rosha. It's not from an evil son. Wenn man darf durch dem Entfern bewornen, that you need through the answer to make sure. Oh, if you don't tell him the answer, as om mekayim zayin the mitzvahs shvius, he should fulfill the mitzvah shvius. Otherwise, he won't do it because he says, "What are we going to eat?" So we cannot do it. But in azaf fall, if that was the case, then Torah would have told it to us immediately when the Torah says the mitzvah shvius, right after shvius. Say, well, to make sure that you're going to do it. If you're not going to eat, so what am I going to do? So Torah has to promise you, no, don't worry. You're going to have what to eat. It doesn't say, because that's not the question. No, those are Shailas Ben Chochem. It's a Shailah of a wise son. It's not like it seems. What are we going to eat? It's a question of a Chochem. A son who's a Chochem. Und Teichen Shalosi is, what's his question? His question basically is, all of the Hashem's promises and blessings are going to be in the food and the grain, but we don't have any grain. How is that manifest? How is the Hashem's blessings going to rest on a place where there's no food? Lernen die Gavtoches from the Ebersten. But no, it's piri v'chaltem lo soiva goyber. The food will give and you'll eat it to satisfaction. Vila ben Chochem verstehen the protem van der bracha. So the son who is a wise wants to understand the details and the way of this blessing. In what way will the blessings come in the Yoram and Lein Nizra v'Lein Nesra to Asena, those years when we don't sow and we don't gather our grain? Now, is there a possibility Abishta can give us the money from the heaven? What as Ken Zayin become an Yonim? We want to try to find out. It's not challenging, but to figure out. As Ken Zayin become a fan, it could be different ways. Bis durchgeben in the Jordan, man min Hashemayim. Maybe those years will get one from the heaven. As we midbar just like in the midbar for 40 years. Every single day they got. So maybe we'll get it for those years. Antwort man ihm, that's the answer. as the brocha wird sein in an Eufen, the blessing is going to be in a way as the Erd wird in der Shona Hashishis Arizgeb Maribu Tvur, that the land will in the 6th year give lots of grain. It will make the grain for 3 years. So the question the Rebbe asked in Rashi, why doesn't Rashi address why this question comes at the end? The way the Rebbe learns, the question comes at the end because it's a question of Ben Chochem. If it came in the beginning, then you could understand the question. You could think the question is, oh, why should we do the mitzvah shvi? So maybe we shouldn't do it because we're not going to have what to eat. And to clarify that this is a question of a Ben Chochem. The question, and that comes to mind when we say v'chi. And the Rebbe asked before, well, maybe this is not a bad question. It's not a question that challenges. And therefore, yes, v'chi tzemru manoichal. When you ask the question, you're going to want to know, how is this blessing going to come down to Ben Chochem? I'm telling you how it's going to come down. It's going to come down through the ground. It's not going to come through a mun. It's going to come down through the ground. But all this, the Rebbe, based on explaining that over time when we have a question of v'chi, it means a question in all of Torah, we have the Chochem. And it's not only with regards that the Rebbe explained also about Sichos, the Rashi is in Parshas Boy, and the 4 sons, and how the questions of the Rosha and the Shemittah Lishol that the Pasuk addresses has to do with Pesach, according to Pshuto Shemikra. The question of the Tippish has to do with B'choyer. The question of the Chochem has to do with all mitzvahs. In our case, this is a question of a Chochem wanting to know how it's going to come down. And Rebbe also explained that there's also a difference between a Tippish and a Tam, that the B'choyer is a Tippish because he doesn't know anything. By the Tam, it's a little complex, so he's a Tam. In Zayin, the Rebbe goes to the Pnimis Inyon. Pnimis Inyon. Oy Zayin. B'Pnimis Inyon. Man hat schon gerät, kamo pa'omim. Wegen dem was the Torah stellt an Inyan b'derech Shailu Tshuva. We've already spoken many times. When the Torah writes something, a question and an answer, instead of giving you the answer. As here we say, V'chisoimru ma'noichal, what are you going to eat? V'tzivisas b'chosigim. This is a question. As Yibaldas a Torah nitzchis, Torah is eternal. Kumtois as the Shaila v'chisoimru ma'noichal. It turns out that this question, what are we going to eat, is a Shaila nitzchis, it's an eternal question. Oich noch dem Women hat gesehen die Teitzoes Teufels von der Teshuvah. The question remains even after seeing the results of Hashem's response. What did Hashem say? By the Friedrich Shemittah, the earlier Shemittah you saw. And still the Torah has the same question. Can Kumen Iberanize the Shaila v'chisemru manoichal? You can a renewed question again. What are we going to eat? How? Well, the Shemittah is the avodah from Bittul Hayesh. Shemittah is the service of negating yourself, your ego. Let's say, as the etzem is the oved Hayesh. That means, in essence, you are an entity. You have a self. You have an ego. But it is mevatel zayin yesh mitzat kabolos el malchus shemayim. But you subjugate yourself and you negate your entity because you accept the heavenly kingdom for Hashem. With zayin yesh, and because the fact that you are a yesh and then bleibt by iman is in a smoke of Hashayla, so there still remains room for a question. Akasha. And you need to tell him all the time, I will have the bracha, because it's not like he changed around. He still feels himself, and there's always initiative. That's how the Rebbe explained. Aber, so that would make sense if we said that the question is asked by a challenging question. But here we're saying this is not a question challenging. This is a question of trying to figure out. Oh, but if you be now, but according to the previous explanation, we're talking about the question of a son who's wise. His questions are not because of Yeshus, but he's asking not out of self-preservation and self-feelings, his ego. He's asking wisdom, a question, how does it work? So why is there such a question by the Ben Chochem? So what is he asking? Every year anew. Why is he asking again? Is the beating them their nest from Vitzivisas of Berchosi Gamer? Bishona Hashishi is Vasa Tvul Shoshonim. This miracle, I'm going to tell my blessing for on the 6th year, it'll do for 3 years, is not Hecher from Teva. That's not only beyond nature, higher than nature. Versus Heipech HaTeva Legabri, it's contrary, opposite of nature totally. Loi darke HaTeva Averta Sode Schwacher, Mogerer from Yor to Yor. The natural way, the field becomes weaker. Every year, year to year, is more used up. Not only is that the nature, but that's one of the reasons. The derech hateva is einer for the timing. This, because of this nature, becomes one of the reasons of Shemittah's karkois. So why should we let our fields go so they're not worked all the time? B'shav Soret Shabbos LaHashem should rest for Hashem. Kidei shetoisiv haaretz tvuasa v'techzak be'emda shmuta. It should strengthen itself while ba'amda shmuta, when it's sending released. Nobody's working it. It'll get its strength. That's one of the reasons. So it's getting weaker. And it's specifically in that 6th year, when the earth is in its schwachsten Maimedomatzim, when the earth is in its weakest position, its standing and condition, he gives Tvul for 3 years. So since it's a miracle that has no room, has no hold in nature, it's totally opposite. And the contrast is it's specifically in a way that goes totally against nature. An Indian was in Legambri Hechav and Seichel. It's something which is totally higher than Seichel. Frek der Ben Chochem, the Ben Chochem asks, if you say, what shall we eat? Afilu nochon entfer from Vitzivisas Berchosi. He says, what are we going to eat? It remains higher than Seichel. When he's asking the question again, that points to the fact it's totally logical. The Rebbe brings down over here that explained elsewhere why is there still a question in Torah after we have the answer. That's why the Torah writes it, because the question itself is Torah. But now that we explained, the Rebbe asked that this is Shilas Chochem, why do we have to ask it every year? And the Rebbe says because this Sivisas Berchosi for the 6th year, which is the last year after the Shemittah, for the earth to produce 3 times as much is contrary to nature. So therefore, even if we know that the Eibush gave the bracha, surprising, it's not, how could that be? Manoichal, how could that be? It represents the idea that it's higher than Seichel.